Guys, welcome back to, actually that should say day 4 of 5.3. So today we're actually going to go backwards. We're going to be given a graph, and then we're going to find the equation given that graph, okay? And this homework is still going to be on IXL. So I'm just going to dive right into it. Now, there's a couple of things that you should note. First is, for these, there's technically infinite answers. These trig functions, or at least sine and cosine, just repeat their waves. So there's technically infinite answers, because if you have this graph, you could just slide, if you can imagine, this goes like this, something like that. If you just slide everything to the right this amount, well, it'd still overlap each other, it'd still be the same graph. And the also important thing to note is that these technically can be sine or cosine functions, okay? You could make a sine or cosine function fit this graph. Now, I personally think cosine is the easiest because it starts at the crest and it ends at a crest. And your homework today is only going to accept answers for cosine. So for today, I'm going to do everything in cosine. You still could do everything in sine, right? Sine starts at the midline going up, down. And so you could use sine. It'd be a little more difficult, and the pictures that I took were had in mind that we were going to do cosine, and so will the homework. So first things first, you need to know your basically the transformations of these graphs. So what, it's a cosine of b x plus c plus d, or do I have it backwards? Basically, this is the amplitude. This changes to period, horizontal shift, vertical shift. And so I always look, well, I think D and A are probably the easiest. First, amplitude and D is midline, so those kind of go hand in hand in figuring this out. I always look at the highest point, which is 2, and the lowest point, which is -2. Halfway in between there has to be a midline, right? And so the midline here is going to be 0. So D is going to be 0. So there's a plus 0. We don't even need to write it, but I will. And that means the amplitude would be 2. So we have 2 cosine. Well, there's a couple things we can do here again. As far as, well, with the infinite solutions, we know that at 0, normal cosine without transformations, it would start at the crest, but down here it starts at the trough. So maybe that makes you think negative value. So you could throw a negative value up there. So I'll do one with negative and one with the positive. 2 cosine. Well, if it's negative, then we don't even need to do a horizontal shift, because you start at your trough and then you go to your crest, then trough. So this would be one period right here. So doing this one, going along with this one, we need to find our B though. We need to find a period. So a period is from one starting point to another. I'll do a crest to a crest. And so it's from 3 pi over 4 to pi over 4. Well, just subtract these fractions. That equals 2 pi over 4, which equals pi over 2. Now remember, the period does not equal B. B equals the period, or sorry, what am I doing? Oh, okay. The period, which is pi over 2, equals 2 pi divided by the absolute value of B. And so we can solve this. So times B over here, so you got B equals, and then you divide by this guy. So it'd be 2 pi. So it's basically just a solve problem. You want to solve for this. So multiply this over here, and then divide by pi over 2 to both sides. Divided by pi over 2, which is same as multiplying by 2 over pi. So you get 2 times 2, which is 4. So your B value is going to be 4. So one possible equation we have is y equals -2 cosine of 4x. If you don't throw in a negative, well, then you have to do a horizontal shift because it doesn't start at crest, so you need to move this guy over. Well, we already said that our b is 4, and that wouldn't change because our period's still the same. And we shift to the right, which is always opposite, so it needs to be a minus, and we need to say what we shift to the right to. So we start at pi over 4, so you subtract pi over 4. And so that would be these two equations right here and here would both work for this graph. Okay, they're the same graph. So obviously this negative is easier. The hardest part might be finding the b. It's just a little bit of solving. Now, on your homework, I believe they ask you if there is a case where you have to do a horizontal shift, that you write it like this. Remember yesterday we had to pull out basically the GCF from the parentheses, so they ask you to have that pulled out on the IXL. So I don't think they would take, let's see, it'd be minus pi. I don't think they would take that, even though technically it's the same thing. They might. They might, but they might not. I don't think so. But moving on. So again, we're going to do with cosine. Y equals cosine. Oh. A cosine of b, x plus c plus d. So midline and amplitude, let's start with that. Midline, well, highest value is 2, lowest value is 0, so our midline, hopefully we can see, is at 1. So you actually go up 1. Okay, and then our amplitude would also be 1. So we just have 1 cosine. Now we need to find a b and a c. Well, there is no horizontal shift, right? We start at a crest right at 0. So we don't even need to add anything here. So we just need to find our b. And so 1 period, well, if you look right here, the period is 1. So remember from yesterday, or maybe it's 2 days ago, period equals 2 pi divided by b. So basically, in these problems, you're plugging in the period right here, which we said is 1. So you have 1 equals 2 pi divided by b times by b. So times by b here, by b here. So b equals 2 pi. So we'll have 2 pi x plus 1 on the outside. Okay, and that would be an equation. Which, this makes sense, right? Because this is our b value, so if you wanted to find your period like we were graphing, then we would take 2 pi divided by our b, which is 2 pi, and that gets you 1. Well, that's what we want. Our period is 1. Okay, so not too difficult. I think this is the last example for us today. Okay, so again, find our midline. So the highest you get is -2, lowest is -4. So your midline would be at right in between, which would be -3. So you go down 3. Well, that means our amplitude would be 1. So 1 cosine. Now again, you start at a crest, not a trough, or you start at a trough, not a crest. So you could just throw a negative here, because that would flip all the crests and troughs. So that would put our starting point right there. But then we need to find our period. So from pi over 4 to 3 pi over 4, well, we already did that before, right? That's pi over 2. Well, that's lame. That's our period, equals 2 pi divided by b. So again, you solve, of course, reuse numbers, that sucks. we already solved this one on the first slide. We would get b equals 4. So you could have 4x, and this would be a possible equation. Another one, if you don't throw the negative in, let's have 1 cosine of 4. And now we need to have our correct value. Well, if you think about it, because there's infinite, you could either move the starting point to the left or to the right. So there's multiple answers. I'm just going to move it, say it goes to the right. So you go to the right, pi over 4, okay, and that means you subtract pi over 4. And those two would end up being the same graph, okay? Now again, I think on IXL, if you have horizontal transformation in yours, you have to have the number on the outside. Okay, so give this a shot. If you have questions, you can always show up to the Zoom session at 1 o'clock today. So with that being said, have a good day, Jays.